Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. If you're still standing and chatting, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and take your seat. We will have some more time for networking right after this session, and also at our Champion of Hope's reception and dinner this evening. So while it may look outside that things are breaking down, it's just so we can turn it over and get into a little bit of some party atmosphere later this evening and have some more time for inspiration. So I want to go ahead and just jump right into our final education and discussion session for this afternoon. And I'm going to start by introducing the session and our speakers, and then Scott's going to speak a bit, and then Allison will come up and join him, and we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So this final session is on data and technological innovation. New technological innovations are revolutionizing the type and amount of data that can be collected when studying a rare disease. This in turn strengthens understanding of the progression of a rare disease and or the effectiveness of potential treatments. These innovations provide a way not just to collect data that is truly these innovations provide a way to collect data that is truly patient-centric, and our speakers today will be discussing those exciting applications of new tools. Scott is a clinical strategist with a 25-year background in clinical drug development focused on rare diseases, orphan drugs, and advanced therapeutics. He develops innovative solutions and strategic considerations to help overcome the operational, logistical, and ethical challenges inherent to conducting research with rare patients. Scott's efforts are focused on patient-centered approaches to drug development, reducing the burden of clinical trial participation, and leveraging novel and disruptive technologies to bring new therapies to patients faster. Allison Moore will be joining as a second speaker, and she's founder and CEO of the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation and advocate in supporting patients with Charcot-Marie-Tooth, and Charcot, thank you. Shoot, so close. Marie-Tooth and other rare diseases. Allison's unique personal experience drive her commitment on the importance of putting patients first. She has been the principal investigator on 2 PCORI grants on HNF's patient registry platform, Global Registry for Inherited Neuropathies, and has experience in patient engagement methods with an emphasis on identifying the gaps that hinder CMT patient care, standard of care guidelines, issues with diagnosis, therapy development, and the need for improved clinical outcome measures and endpoints to support clinical trials. And with that, I will pass the clicker to Scott.
Couple mics here. Come on in if you're filing in, and congratulations to making it to the closing session, and thanks for being here today. And thanks for the introduction. So, overcoming the challenges of rare disease clinical research. I think that a lot of you in the room touch clinical trials, and you're hearing a lot about the clinical trial process during these last 2 days. At the same time, that can be a little boring, right? Clinical Trials 101 might not just sort of get you out of bed in the morning. So at the end of day 2, at the closing session here, I'm going to try to talk about a few things that maybe you haven't heard before, and I'm going to try to keep things light, and I'm going to try to keep your attention. I'm also going to speak about the Bible, and I'm going to speak about Kodak Cameras, and so maybe that's the first time you're hearing that today as well. All right, so we're moving forward with a new paradigm of clinical research, and I think it's important to also understand where we've been and kind of where we are now and where we're headed. So I'd like to first start by talking about kind of the world's first clinical trial, really, an inadvertent clinical trial, if you will. So going way back to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, as cited in the book of Daniel of the Bible. Not the Bible expert by any means, as some of you know. But the first inadvertent clinical trial, King Nebuchadnezzar decided that if you could just eat meat and drink wine all the time, it would be much better for your health, right? So I'm a subscriber to the wine part of that diet quite a bit. But some of his royal subjects disagreed, and they wanted to continue with a vegetarian diet. So he allowed some of his young royals to continue eating just vegetables and water. After a week or so, he looked at the effects of the meat eaters and the wine drinkers versus the vegetarians, and he thought the vegetarians looked better and that it was better for their health. So he allowed them to kind of continue on that vegetarian diet. So this was our first kind of inadvertent experiment, if you will, of trying two different interventions, two different therapies, two different diets. Maybe not the most scientific experiment ever run, arbitrarily creating a comparator arm, and his outcome assessments might have just been, how do you look, how do you feel? But this is kind of where we got started, was Nebuchadnezzar. So if that's news to you, I hope that's one thing that kind of we walk away out of Irvine from, is that Babylon got us all started. So moving forward today to the world of clinical research and clinical trials, they're called trials because we don't really know what's going to happen, and there's a lot of challenges to conducting clinical research. When you take clinical research and you overlay rare disease complications on top of it, it becomes exponentially more complicated and complex to run clinical trials in rare diseases. Why is that? There's a host of reasons and a host of challenges and a host of burdens here. So, for example, in the rare space, we're often, if you're enrolling in a clinical trial, we're often enrolling the entire family, whether it's a child, a parent, a caregiver, maybe a relative, maybe an expanded network of sorts. We're not just enrolling a subject or a participant. There's often a whole family to consider that could include things like time away from school, time away from family, babysitting. We have a family we even arranged dog walking services for so that they could participate in a clinical trial. So this whole family network needs to be involved, which makes things a little hard. By nature, patients are rare and patients are few and far between, and patients are geographically dispersed, right? If you have a particular disease, you're not necessarily within driving distance of UC Irvine down the street. You may live in the middle of Nevada. You may have to fly in from Canada. The travel to get to clinical sites becomes very burdensome and challenging for families, of course. And there's a host of other costs associated with that, like the perceptions, time costs, financial costs, emotional, social, etc. Then you get into some more of the more complicated, complex medical scientific aspects around rare diseases that makes clinical trials hard as well. So multidisciplinary diseases that often could involve a neurologist and a radiologist and an endocrinologist, all in the care and management of a patient. So managing that care is hard, but when you want to conduct a controlled clinical trial and you need all of these different providers and experts to be kind of on the same page and available, you can see the complexities that arise there. So there's a host of challenges in the rare space that are tricky, that are challenging. Access to medical records, inconsistent standard of care. What are the endpoints and the outcome measures we're going to use? Are they validated? Do those outcomes reflect what patients want? Do those outcomes reflect what regulators want? Do those endpoints fit for what industry is willing to do? So this whole jarbled complexity of rare disease clinical research gets really tricky. I'm not responsible for that animation, but thanks for your patience. So, letter by letter. So I started a Center for Rare Diseases about 6 years ago because I felt like rare diseases required a different approach and it needed some innovation that wasn't really occurring in just general mainstream clinical research. Our collective experience has given us exposure to all these challenges that we see. At the same time, we're also humble and realize we don't know everything and we need to learn from those most affected by this. So our question was really, how do patients and caregivers really feel? Are those the same burdens and challenges that they experience? So we asked them. Over the months of August and September, we conducted a rare disease patient survey. A couple of you in the room may have actually participated in this and answered some questions for us, so thank you for your time. We asked patients, what was your primary motivation for actually participating in a clinical trial? If we want to understand what the barriers and challenges are, we need to also understand why people want to enroll in a clinical trial and what draws them to that in the first place. In order of kind of frequency, these are the answers that patients came back to us with. I participated because I wanted to help the advancement of research into my disease, because there were no other treatment options available, because I wanted to receive access to high-quality medication, and because the current approved treatment for my disease isn't really working. These are kind of our top 4 reasons why people participated. This might not be groundbreaking, But this was kind of confirmatory for us to see. And as we keep moving letter by letter here, so for those folks who participated in the clinical trial, what were the most challenging barriers you faced while participating? Number one, travel to and from sites. Pretty obvious. That's what we think. That's what patients are telling us. The time commitment is tough. The financial strain is challenging. Even if folks are reimbursed for their costs or provided debit cards up front, there still are hidden inherent costs to participating, to traveling, to accommodations, to meals, to parking, whatever it may be. It all kind of adds up, right? So these are hurdles, right? And every hurdle you add builds upon itself. And then it becomes a little bit overwhelming and kind of maybe too much of a hassle. The strain on family and caregivers, of course, is kind of an obvious one, and this was number 4 from our survey respondents. And then lastly, the host of different things like invasive procedures, cultural barriers in terms of going to a hospital or maybe having a nurse come to your home might not work for everyone. Things around access and disability is really key, and then of course the side effects of the treatments. At the same time, so while we also asked participants who participated in clinical trials, why did you participate and what were the burdens, we also wanted to look at the other end of the spectrum. If you did not participate in a clinical trial, why? What prevented you? We had 432 respondents of this question who asked why. So some of these are obvious, but a lot of patients did not meet the eligibility criteria in that clinical trial. The clinical trial might have been very specific in terms of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. It might have also just been unrealistic and not really reflective of the condition patients are in or the comorbidities they have. Clinical trials open, they enroll, and then they close. We want to keep that window open, and a lot of patients couldn't participate because the trial didn't stay open long enough. Trial site far away. So again, the travel issue, geographics. The trial was never offered to me was another point. So a lot of physicians might be unaware. They might not be participating. It might not be offered in their center, etc. So we learned a little bit. We had some of our thoughts validated with our respondents, and it gave us some more insight into what we really think the challenges really are. So what do we do about this? How do we overcome these challenges of geography and travel and finances and burden and caregivers and families? How do we bring clinical trials directly to patients and families as opposed to having families travel to clinical sites back and forth? And really the big question for me is, as you move forward with a new paradigm in this area, what does a sustainable, feasible, new clinical research paradigm really look like? So before we talk about that, we're going to talk about cameras for a second. Maybe. Yeah. Sorry for the formatting. So Kodak Cameras, why is that a relevant topic? Kodak got started in the market a long, long time ago. Some of our millennials out there might not even know who Kodak is these days anymore, right? They had a head start and a 10-year head start on any competition with a digital camera in 2002. By 2012, Kodak declared bankruptcy and disappeared. Even though they had this tremendous technology, this advancement, they were way out ahead of everyone with this new cutting-edge digital photography, and they didn't last. And the question really is why? Why not? Did they not listen to their customers about what their customers wanted? Did they not think about what was new and different? Were they fearful of evolving and kind of embracing this new technology and not knowing where it was going to go? Were they risk averse? Other companies came in and saw an opportunity to disrupt the process and challenged and competed with Kodak. And they didn't look ahead, and they didn't really look to their customers and ask, what do you want? Similar and analogous to the way we run clinical trials and develop drugs, we don't often ask patients what you'd like. What do you need? What's important to you? We're often developing drugs in a bubble and hoping that patients come and enroll, or hoping that patients will travel to a site. So this process, this idea of disconnecting from our ultimate stakeholders, of our ultimate partners, has led other industries to sort of topple. And we have an opportunity in our world right now to change that paradigm and to disrupt that and to look at our end users and partner with patients in a different way. So this quote I really love, "Nothing about us without us." Some of you may have heard this. This is the European Cancer Patient Coalition. And to me, this quote really drives a lot of what I do personally, and it reminds me all the time that we historically, whether it was Nebuchadnezzar or Dr. James Lynn with the first clinical trial in scurvy, or whether it's just about us generating new clinical trial data today, the idea that we rely completely on patients and their data, but we don't really include patients in the process, right? Nothing about us without us. If you want our data, you need to take all of us with you, not just our data. You need to include our perspective. You need to include our opinions, our wants, our needs, our wishes. Our ultimate stakeholders and our ultimate partners out there have not typically had a seat at the table. But the good news is the winds are changing. We have regulators behind us. We have the 21st Century Cures Act. We have our European partners with the Adaptive Pathways workshops. We have patient-focused drug development workshops that we can attend that are externally led. Patient centricity, as much as I hate that term, I'm glad we're talking about it. And I'm glad that we're talking about patient-focused approaches. So I think things feel good to me. I feel like we're going in the right direction. Historically, we have not been in the right area, but there's good trends and there's good momentum. So as we look at changing a paradigm and we look at removing those hurdles and barriers that patients have that prevent them from participating in a clinical trial or prevent them from staying in a clinical trial, we have to think about models that make a clinical trial fit seamlessly into a patient's life. A lot of times, and I've spoken with many of you here, we often see clinical trial protocols developed, I like to say, in a conference room in New Jersey. There are assessments listed, like we'd like PK draws at certain time points, and we'd like patients to come in every 3 days to the clinic to have this test done. We want to have blood draws every 24 hours if we can. And then we develop these protocols and we put them out there, and we hope that patients enroll. And a lot of times we say things like, but that drug is so good, patients will just kind of deal with it. I don't think they will, and I don't think they are. And I think our current model of clinical trials are taking too long and they're costing too much. And I think there's an opportunity to change that whole process. So the idea that we can change the model of patients having to go to a clinical site all the time and travel at their inconvenience, as opposed to let's make clinical trials move to where patients are. Let's bring clinical trials into patients' homes. Let's use technology that we have right in front of us. A lot of you might be multitasking on your iPhone right now. The technology on that phone right now allows us to do things like video teleconference in with our physicians and just check in really quick, or take a picture of the drug we just took, or to push out a survey remotely via a phone, or to link up with a home healthcare nurse that can travel to a patient's home to take a blood draw or administer drug or deliver some supplies. These technologies and options and opportunities are right here in front of us today and have been for a while. We're in an industry, though, that sometimes is a little risk-averse and sometimes is a little fearful of taking some chances and trying out some new innovations that might not necessarily be proven. So the idea that we have in front of us of moving trials to patients as opposed to patients going to clinical sites is the model we need to embrace. And when you have patients in the middle, then you're really talking about a patient-focused approach. The slide up here shows what we like to think about a care circle and how you can connect in for a given patient, maybe a parent, a caregiver, maybe a physician, maybe a nurse, maybe another healthcare professional that's important to them, so that everyone can stay aware of what's going on with this patient, what's going on with their clinical trial, so that different people can kind of input and plug into the process. We talk a little bit too about virtual clinical trials. And while this term is getting some traction in the industry, virtual is a little bit problematic, right? We're not actually trying to simulate clinical studies. We're not trying to make them artificial. These are very real, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to move from the spectrum of brick and mortar travel to a clinical site to reducing the number of visits and reducing the burden on patients, and moving on that spectrum. And maybe it's just a crawl, walk, run approach to moving from an old paradigm to a new paradigm that leverages data and leverages technology. With Bluetooth-enabled devices, we can measure all kinds of things remotely now in a validated way. You can see some of the measures that are getting routinely used in clinical trials today. Sure, some of these need to be validated a little bit more. And sure, certainly, if you need to have an MRI done, you need to go to a hospital. But there are so many things that can be done remotely in a way that's easy for patients. So this new paradigm will solve some of these challenges we have. These will connect patients to sites and distant investigators in a way where we don't have to get on an airplane. We can watch a live streaming remote session right now from home. Why can't we do something like that with the clinical trial? So all these options are here in front of us today, so it's very exciting. So where are we headed, actually? Well, right now, the biggest hotelier in the world has no hotel rooms whatsoever. That's Airbnb. The largest taxi service in the world does not own a car. Uber is leading us in new directions. Our future cars probably aren't even going to have drivers, right? There's opportunities and there's innovation to change and look differently. I think our future clinical trials will revolve around patients and hopefully seamlessly fit right in with patients' lives. That's my spiel. Thanks for listening. Do I keep this on?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Is it on? Scott, thank you for that talk. It's a good segue into what H&F is doing, so I'm going to start with this now. Next slide. Or do I push it? How do I do it? I hit play? Okay, perfect. So the Global Registry for Inherited Neuropathies was created 5 years ago. We launched the patient registry as an IRB-approved surveys, and we collected data on 2,500 patients. We identified many gaps that needed to address to improve care for patients as well as to enhance clinical trials. Through one of the surveys we did, we learned that pain was identified as the #1 issue that CMT patients were dealing with. And even though patients shared this with us, we knew that the medical community was not recognizing this as a crucial part of living with this disease. So with this work, we were excited because the 2 clinical trial pipelines that are now in clinical trials are now using pain scales. So this registry actually allowed us to qualify patients for these clinical trials and improve patient care. But I will have to say there were many challenges with the platform. You can see the list here. The platform had limitations. It wasn't super user-friendly for patients and administrators. The reporting tools were difficult for us, and creating genetic data was extremely difficult. So one example of a study that we did was we were approached by a pharmaceutical company to launch a PRO study, and we wanted to do it through the patient registry, but we couldn't. It was impossible to do it. And it was an extensive study of 1,200 patients, and it was a shame because we had to end up doing it just as a basic survey. So we didn't have the opportunity to go back to these patients for more data, which was really difficult for us as we were approaching more clinical trials. So we came up with a solution. The solution was to build our own proprietary platform, which we just launched approximately 3 weeks ago, which was timely because last Friday, H&F was approved. Well, H&F hosted an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. So this new platform is mobile-friendly, which is incredible. It's embedded right into the H&F site, so it makes it very easy for people to find us, and it looks like our site. We now can incorporate validated scales into the site. So the next project for us, which we'll be launching shortly, is we're doing a suicidal approved instrument. As we know with rare diseases, often patients do feel suicidal. Caregivers certainly can feel the same way, and often people do take their own life. So we feel this is very important, and we know that one of our partners, phase 3, is using the suicidal scale, and we're going to try to collect enough data to help decide what type of endpoint it should be in the trial. Then what we are able to do with this platform is collect robust data and it's segmented where we can really find the perfect patient for clinical trials. So that was important to us. And lastly, we just incorporated recently, and this is why Global Genes asked me to be here today, we incorporated voice activation technology, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So I'm just briefly going to go through this. We launched, I said 3 weeks ago, with these 4 studies. The first one was a natural history study, which we had already had a study that we put into a legacy file, and we ended up building a more robust, I don't know what just happened to this, a more robust natural history study with branching capabilities. So if somebody says, yes, they have respiratory dysfunction, we can branch off and do another study collecting a lot more data. As well as we all know, cannabis is the talk of the town these days. So because our disease population suffers with chronic pain, we recently launched with a dispensary sponsor and a couple other people in the space a study to really understand how we're using cannabis in the patient community and if it's safe. And lastly is the voice activation technology that we're really, really excited about, and I think it works really well with what PRO and Scott's team is doing today to improve clinical trials. Does this look normal up there? Because it doesn't on the screen. There we go. So H&F partnered with a company called TrueReply, and TrueReply has the capability to capture PROs, patient-reported outcomes, in the voice of the patient, which is very unique. We did a pilot program last year. Through a PCORI grant, we were able to present the data at MIT, and it was well received. The technology is AI-powered, so the analytics are very, very good. It gives you an opportunity to really go deep into language, the recognition of the voice, really hearing what the patients are dealing with. It's scalable, it's definitely cost-effective. And we were able to incorporate it into the PFDD meeting, and the FDA received this very well. And one last thing about this slide is when you're talking about behavioral health and depression, those are things that are sometimes hard to capture on a traditional survey. So we use this technology to help us develop this agenda for the summit that we also hosted the day after the FDA meeting. So as Scott said, it's not completely validated, but we've been able to extract a lot of information. So the question we asked is, what is the one symptom of your CMT that has the biggest impact on your life? And this is quantitative data that was the 4 top things that showed up, and it was impaired walking, balance, weakness, and pain. So this was interesting information, but for us as patients and advocates, it was really exciting to hear what happened next. This was the qualitative data. I'm going to show you a short clip. It's 5 minutes. I'm only going to show you about a minute. So please play it.
I can't sleep or work or drive. There's no comfortable position for me that doesn't feel like I'm on fire. Honestly, it's like being tortured. And to add to the misery, I'm treated like a drug addict.
Muscle atrophy.
Weakness and fatigue.
My inability to walk and stand up properly for long periods of time.
Balance.
Numbness.
My feet.
Not being able to use my hands.
Pain.
So I think you can stop it. You
Foot
kind of get the
deformity.
gist of this. What was so exciting was we had approximately 12 testimonies of children and adults at the meeting, but this was another way to capture 30 more testimonies from patients. So you really captured how much these patients were suffering from their disorders. Next slide. So finally, towards the end of the meeting, we thought it was very important to actually ask these patients what they're willing to do for a 6-month clinical trial. So as you can see, if you were to participate in a 6-month clinical trial, what would you be willing to do at home as part of the study? So the 2 top things came up, were some of the things that were talked about, is the wearables that we are seeing now being used by pharmaceutical companies in trials. But also, we were surprised, well, not that surprised because we championed it, but as you can see, 21% of patients feel really good about calling into a number to explain what they're going through. And caregivers can do the same thing. So when you're dealing with a lot of these diseases, especially like CMT, we have a lot of hand problems. It's grueling sometimes, or really difficult to sit down and answer these traditional surveys. And then when you're dealing with pain and behavioral health, a lot of those measures are not as good as we believe the voice of the patient can get across to regulators and hopefully approving drugs. So when we got these results and we curated the data, we realized, okay, well, while we're waiting for these 2 treatments that we hope will get approved, we have to address these issues that came up over and over again through the voice of the patient. Mobility issues have to be addressed with better bracing and physical therapy. Pain management, obviously we're doing this now with cannabis use, but we also have to be looking at drugs and opioids that safely can be used to help these patients. The impact of patient symptoms on behavioral health, which this is the first time we've addressed this. Longitudinal monitoring, we can use the technology week after week, month after month, to see if there's improvement with some of our programs. And I think we can all do that with our advocacy groups. So what's in the future for what I like to call that voice activation technology? We know from curated or an environmental scan that TrueReply has done that by 2025, voice technology is going to be the interface for almost anybody in the world. And it actually may even be sooner because we're dealing with this with Alexa, Google Home, and so forth. So what are we going to do about this? We are hoping with Scott, we had a meeting earlier, and PraHealth, and hopefully Global Genes and other thought leaders, that we can start thinking about using voice technology as an option for capturing patient-reported outcomes and possibly validating this to help get drugs fast-tracked to the market. So I think that's pretty much it. So my last comment is H&F is committed to using cutting-edge technology that are beneficial, that will enhance patient-focused research initiatives, not only for CMT, but for all rare diseases. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. Do I have any mic runners in here in the back? If not, it will be me. Is there any questions? Oh, thanks, Maureen. Any questions? I love looking out at the full house. This is really impressive. Anyone? Okay.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Donnell, and I'm with the Usher Syndrome Coalition. Usher syndrome is the leading genetic cause of someone being born deaf and becoming blind. Hi, over here. So as we're listening to this great tool that you're describing for voice activation, just want to put a thought into the universe about how can we include individuals who do not use voice to communicate, those who are deaf or just don't have the capability of including it, because now would be the time to include that option either for texting or whatever. And that would also include our community, individuals who are deafblind.
I think that's an excellent question. I know the company is investing in arms to do this. So just so you know, we're thoughtful of this because in the CMT community, we have 100 variants of the disease, and several of them, the patients are going blind, and they also have hearing loss. So it is something on the horizon, and I'm happy to give you my card later, and we can share more on that. Thanks for asking.
Another question up front. Make Stephanie get some exercise.
Get extra cake tonight. That's right.
Go, Stephanie, go.
Thank you. I'm from the UK, so I'm giving you information from the European community. On your point, the Philips have developed a a portable MRI scanner that can go around to the community. That was only recently developed. And the voice activated technology, there's a platform called the Ecosystem for Europe for Digital Health. They're already looking into that. It's been established for over a year. So I think you need to speak to them.
Go ahead.
You want to go for it? Well, I'd like to learn more about that. I know there are other companies out there, and they're using it for Alzheimer's. And I think getting this language and voice activation where you can see trends in improved speech is huge. So I don't know about this one, but I'd love to learn more about it. So afterwards, can I give you my business card? Thank you.
Yeah, and for the MRI piece, I think that, I guess this is working, there's more and more portable devices, which I think is fantastic. I guess I have a pragmatic, realistic view that, you know, we can't move to a completely virtual world tomorrow. There are some things that we probably have to go into a clinic or site or hospital for, but I'm hoping that we can look to continue to minimize those and make those portable or remote or digital or what have you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Scott and Allison. If you'd like to just stay up here for a moment while I make our final remarks. Okay. Maureen, will you join me up here on stage? Thank you. Maureen MacArthur-Hart was critical in putting together all of the agenda and speakers for this summit, and so I wanted to give her a moment to just talk a little bit about that.
Hi, everyone. As Meredith said, I just wanted to take just a few minutes and thank all of our absolutely amazing speakers. I have the honor and the privilege to speak with each and every one of them in advance of the summit, so I get a preview of how fantastic the sessions are going to be. And I was truly blown away this year. I was so excited about this year because of the speakers. So I just wanted, first of all, again, to thank them, but also reflect on just a few themes that have really run through all of the discussion sessions this year. So thank you to all of our speakers. We have learned so very much this year from academic researchers, from industry representatives, and of course, from so many patients and advocates who have shared their experiences and their opportunities, as well as their solutions. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our exhibitors. This year we had that wonderful exhibitor hall, and it was wonderful to have the opportunity to learn and talk to so many of them. So thank you all for joining us as exhibitors as well. So there were, of course, many very specific ideas discussed in every session, but I wanted to call attention, as I said, to just a few themes. So first, the theme about the strength of this community, beginning with Rachel's incredibly beautifully opening keynote, reminding us that we all have awesome superpowers, to the stories about patients driving advances by collecting and sharing data, to the reminder to ask for help, that there are people and organizations out there who have wrestled with some problems, who are currently wrestling with some problems, and who are eager to help you if you are having some of the same concerns or issues or questions. Second, the hope and promise that grows every day for this community, from new innovations in science and technology, like having tissues on a chip, to some of these new ways to collect and analyze data, to new therapeutic approaches for rare disease, to just realizing and addressing the emotional health needs for patients and caregivers. And finally, the power of collaboration. From the global initiatives that involve sometimes hundreds of collaborators to individual collaborations between advocates and patients and researchers, to the recognition of working together in order to thrive, collaboration is key. So I'm going to borrow a little bit from Rachel here and bring this full circle. I am honored to be part of putting this agenda together, and I'm honored to see every one of you this year. And I wanted to remind us all that we're here because we're afraid, but we're also here because we're hopeful, and we're here because we're proud. We're proud of our families, we're proud of our work, and we are so proud to be part of this community. So thank you all so much for such an inspiring series of discussions this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so one great reminder for marking your calendar for next year. The party's not over here at the summit this year yet, but next year we will be moving to Sheraton San Diego Marina Hotel. You can see by this, yay, San Diego. You can see by the crowd in here and perhaps some of the crowds that you experienced, we have grown so much that we're kind of outgrowing this space, although we love it, and so we'll be down in a new location. So please mark your calendar. And with that, I'd like to excuse you all to take a few minutes to get refreshed, and please join us back out here at the reception at 5 o'clock. Thank you.